When you're fed up with fighting food and your body, join us here. I'm Ali Shapiro, creator of the Truce with Food program and your host for Insatiable, where we explore the hidden aspects of fighting our food, our weight, and our bodies, and dive deep into nutrition science and true whole health. Fair warning, this is not your parents' health care. This is a big rebel yell to those who crave meaning, hunger for truth, and whose lust for life is truly insatiable. Believe me, freedom awaits. Welcome, everybody, to Season 5 of Insatiable. This season, our theme is eating triggers, namely triggers for the on-off eating cycle. And what we're going to be talking about, especially in this episode, is really focusing on clarity. And the reason that clarity is so important as a tool and a process is because it really helps you get to the root cause of what's happening, right? This podcast, if you've been listening for a long time, you know that we're about the root cause. And when we're eating well, it's not just because of the food. So we're getting clearer on the reasons that we don't eat well. So we're getting to the root cause, which is why clarity is so important. Also, logic doesn't change us. You know, I have been using the example of everyone around me has had dogs and loved dogs. And I was always like, no, I don't want a dog. It took me having personal experience and understanding my own patterns and triggers to now love my dog Coffee and be his biggest fan. Or maybe Carlos would say he is. I don't know. It doesn't matter. Moving on. And lastly, clarity equals distance. So if you've ever been able to look back on something in your life and feel like you've worked through it or that it doesn't trigger you in the same way, it's because you have distance. And clarity gives us that as well. So that's what we're going to focus on again in today's episode. So no matter how well we're doing with our goals, life happens. And it's in those times of uncertainty that many of us turn to self-help experts or books to tell us how to overcome our urges or what we think of as self-sabotage. Often, though, we end up stuck even more, paralyzed by mantras like, be positive or feel your feelings, because we don't know how to actually do that. On today's episode of Insatiable, Eating Triggers Transform Self-Help into Selftrust, one of my clients, Eva, is stopping by to share her Truce with Food story and how she learned that she doesn't need anyone else to tell her what to do or who to be. This is a great liberation story. So before we get started, Eva Schrathforth is a yoga teacher working in the corporate world and currently studying to become a holistic wellness coach. So thank you, Eva, for being here with Juliette and I.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So let's start what led you to how you found Truce with Food in my work and where you were in your life at the time. I guess it was like 8 months ago now, right? Or 6 months?
Yeah, I think it's been a lot earlier. I've listened to Insatiable for a long time before I actually contacted you.
Most people do, which is good. You're taking it all in.
Yeah, exactly. So let's start at the beginning, I guess. So it was probably about 2 years ago that I actually found you. And that was at a time where I had what I would call my dream job now. I was really in flow. It was a tiny business that I was building from scratch, and I poured my heart and soul into it, really. And at that point, I was also eating really well and exercising every day and started yoga teacher training, and everything was awesome. But then things happened and things turned around. So that job was a big risk that I had taken on because it was a tiny business, and I saw it as an opportunity to run a business myself. But then a year later, we came to the point where I had to go part-time, and that didn't work because I was about to take out a mortgage. And then I had to look for something new, and I found something new, and that was the perfect job again, kind of on paper. So the right title and the right company and everything was amazing on paper, but then sitting in there, I didn't fit into the culture, and that didn't work out either. And then I found a job in time to close the deal with the mortgage, and everything was fine. I was back to doing what I'm good at, back in the corporate world. And everything looked fine on the outside, but on the inside, it wasn't so much fine. So, which kind of brings me to that whole self-help thing, because I'd spend a lot of time just I always I was always reading a self-help book, listening to all the podcasts and doing all the things. But at that point, it kind of didn't help me anymore. But I guess we'll come back to that part. What kind of made me a bit angry at that time was that I heard, just go for it. And you have to take risks and you have to push yourself outside your comfort zone. And the worst thing that can happen is that you end up exactly where you were before. And that happened. But I wasn't just where I were before. I was actually depressed where I were before. And I actually had panic attacks at work as well. So yeah, it was a hard time. And then the other thing, then I started Truce with food and came at it more from that self-help angle, because I'd spent so much time kind of looking for this flow and for this purpose and to do meaningful work. And it sounded like Truce with food would give me that. And I wasn't too worried about the food piece. But where the food piece comes in is that in that whole time, this all happened in the span of a year, I also found Dr. Terry Walls. Basically what she did was she reversed her MS by changing her diet. And that really hit home for me because my mom has MS and I had grown up with that whole notion of we can't do anything about it. We just have to accept it and live with it. And so that kind of turned my whole world upside down. And then, I listened to Insatiable. She was on the podcast. I kept listening. But so I had found this sort of purpose in the sense that I needed to figure out how to change my diet. And when I was in that job, that was amazing. It was easy for me to eat according to her protocol. And when I sent it to my mom, she was not really willing to try it. And I couldn't quite understand why. But then when I was back in corporate, I understood because it didn't work for me anymore either. And then, mind blown about that. And how can it be not that easy?
I love that you're sharing this because I think so many people can relate to okay, if everything's working perfectly, I can do this food thing. But then the minute one of the pieces falls out, it's kind of like we fall off, right? And it's what's that about? And I think as I hear your story, I think of my former self, and I don't know if you feel this, Juliette, as well, trying to do everything, quote, right, with the self-help and the personal development and going for it. And then it being it must be me because this is just not working out. And to have 3 job changes within a year is that's really stressful.
Yes.
Yeah, I remember when I moved to New York City and had my dream job, and I had my diet in such a good place, was feeling the strongest I had ever felt and just the most regimented, but with ease. It wasn't like I was regimented in a way to control anything. It just was happening, because everything was in place. And then when I moved to New York and there was just more chaos and more responsibility, I found that nutrition plan wouldn't work anymore. And I started to just lose it all. And it was hard to understand, why is this happening? And that's actually when I met Ali, was after that whole thing. So I had a similar experience in that with a job change and it kind of affecting my health, and that being the turning point for me of all right, I need to think about the underlying causes behind the overeating or not eating what I know I should be eating.
And I just want to give all 3 of us credit because we've all gone through this cycle, and anyone listening who's still willing to hang on, right? Even if you're kind of getting your ass kicked. Can we give ourselves some credit?
What were some of the side effects that you were feeling from being in this corporate environment, and, what made you realize that, aside from the panic attacks, but as far as food goes, what did you notice with yourself that you were doing differently than when you had your own business?
Yeah, I think the main thing was just that I was kind of constantly snacking all day at work. So it was kind of be the excuse to leave my desk and go to the kitchen and walk around. And so constantly snacking all day. I didn't really have nighttime eating or binging too much, but just I constantly had to have something in my hand that I would need to snack on. Yeah, and then I tried making that more healthy things like eating carrots and celery and all that kind of stuff. But I did end up always coming back to the Tim Tams here in Australia. It's an Australian biscuit, like a chocolate covered biscuit, and we had them in the fridge, and I would go to the fridge and have one probably 5 times a day, and that was way too much.
Mm-hmm. I love hearing the names of like other country snacks because we've normalized like peanut M&Ms or Snickers, but like when you hear like Tim Tams, it just sounds so innocent and like funny, like friendly, you know?
Yeah.
But what I love that you're describing, Eva, and we talk about this a lot in Truce with Food, and is that like when we're often feeling restricted or like quote unmotivated to, in your case, you know, continue with the Walls protocol, again, we look to the food rather than thinking, how am I emotionally feeling restricted? Like, how am I avoiding speaking up, or how am I really getting in touch with what's important for me rather than feeling like I have to compete or whatnot. And I think people really take the sense of restriction around food at face value, like kind of, again, that it's really that I just want all of this food, when to your point, when the job was working really well, it was easy to find the energy to, you know, do Dr. Walls's protocol or just eat well and not snack. So I just want to like emphasize that as part of your story that other people can learn from.
Like just adding to that, the other thing was just that I had done my yoga teacher training and wanted to do that and wanted to, you know, help people figure this out as well. But then I didn't see how I could do that in my job back then, whereas now I'm actually doing it.
Well, and let's talk about that a little bit, because again, part of what the problem with self-help is that everything is so black and white or all or nothing, which is the very same mindset that we need to get out of. And I don't think people think of it that way, right? Like go big or go home, right? It's like, or I think my least favorite one is it's either a hell yes or a hell no. And, you know, actually she was on the podcast, Randy Buckley says, you know, sometimes if it's like, well, I'm not sure, you might just be a thoughtful, discerning person. And not that other people aren't, but we see these memes and then we don't really know how to have the skills and steps to be slow but steady, I guess I would say, and sustainable. So can you talk a little bit about how like even yoga teacher training kind of knocked you off your game a little bit, and then kind of how you came to embrace the growth mindset that we talk about, that you've actually embodied it and been able to see more opportunities through the Truce with Food tools?
Yeah, so I think everything has its time and place, but kind of how it happened for me, everything was at the wrong time and place.
Welcome to the club. The competitor makes us rush, right?
Yeah, so like I have this resistance to it now, and I listen to, you know, podcasts of motivational speakers, and they say, you have to do this and you have to take the risk and you just have to get over yourself. And it makes my hair stand up now. When I was trying to look at the positive side, like, you know, I had a job again, I could pay my bills. I was kind of heartbroken about having like lost 2 jobs that I really love. And I kept telling myself to just get over it, and that just didn't work. And then on the other hand, from the yoga world, I would hear kind of the other side of, you just have to feel your feelings. And I just didn't know how to do that. So I was really like, I could hear all the advice, but it all didn't mean anything. I couldn't put it into practice, whereas now I feel I can. The other thing with yoga teacher training was that we did a lot of work on like that we all have an inner critic, and we did a lot of work to be able to hear that inner critic. But with all the circumstances that went on for me, that was kind of just I got to this amplified voice of an inner critic inside me, like, you know, you lost these jobs because you're not good enough, you didn't perform. And, you know, that was kind of, I was trapped in that and I couldn't get out of it. I couldn't turn it around. I couldn't turn it into a nice voice in my head. Yeah, and Truce with Food completely turned it around.
Yeah, I want to talk about that, feel your feelings and the inner critic, because I know that was really pretty helpful for you, was seeing the inner critic as an inner protector. Yes. And then actually being able to feel your feelings, but also be objective about them. So can you talk a little bit about how that's been super helpful of actually not just getting over your feelings or moving on, but exploring the uncomfortable feelings. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, and kind of like knowing what to do. Like, so the things that we worked on was kind of identifying what your triggers are. And then we worked on starting to see when you are triggered, but then being able to lean into that. So kind of like listening to music that would help process that feeling, or reaching out to someone and talking to someone, which I didn't do either. And what else? Those are kind of the ones that work well for me now. We had a few, like a meditation. You sent us a Kundalini meditation that worked really well for me as well. So kind of these tactics and coping mechanisms to work through it, and then kind of afterwards you get that perspective of, okay, I can now see what's happening, and kind of switch into that growth mindset of, what can I learn from this? Like, how do I need to deal with this in the future? Like, what do I need to do to work through this feeling, whatever has come up?
Yeah, and I'm glad you said that, because I don't know if either of you have seen this. This kind of meme is going around in self-help worlds where it's like, whatever you think about me is none of my business. And it's like, I don't like that, because sometimes our inner protector is actually causing the reactions, or sometimes we're seeing it incorrectly. And that's not to say that other people's feedback or whatnot or judgment is fair or accurate or is true, but it's kind of just saying that, like, it's
kind of just shutting everybody out, and that there isn't it's not like a give and take situation. It's just like, I'm over here and I'm separated from you, and I'm impervious to you.
Yeah. And it's kind of putting up this boundary similar to like what Eva was saying. I was like, okay, just move on with it. Or like, okay, you're going to be back in the same place. But it's like, no, then you have all this baggage of feeling like you failed or that you're even more lost. I know that's happened to me several times. And rather than looking at it from like a growth mindset, I mean, that's ultimately what we're doing in Truce with Food, is like, what can I learn about the situation? And Eva, what did you learn a lot about the feelings that, it doesn't mean that about uncomfortable feelings. Like, what have you learned about the value of them, I guess?
I guess the biggest thing for me was just that, there's a reason why they are there. And it's not like the more you fight them, the more they're going to come up. It's more like you have to have a conversation with, like, and be like, why is this happening? And I guess what I also learned was just identifying what my actual core fears are, and then being able to work with them and where they actually come from. So looking at your story like way back and seeing where all these feelings originated and why they come up now in certain situations. Yeah, that was mind-blowing to me in Truce with Food. Turned my world around as well.
I think that's so huge. And and it's not black and white. It's not like you have those feelings and then they just dissipate and go away. You can learn to work with them. I don't even necessarily want to say through them, just work around them, work with them, because some of those core feelings that you've had since you're, a little kid, they will follow you. They can follow you till the day you die. And it's not a bad thing. It's just something that you have to understand and work with. And it's not about getting rid of it.
Yeah, I think also one thing I wanted to make sure that I brought up in this episode was, in Truce with Food, some of how we start to look at things objectively about what's ours versus what's other people's reactions is like, what kind of data are we getting back about the person who said this, right? Because often when we're having these like maelstrom of negative feelings, we hear things very differently, right? And I always use the example of like Carlos editing my work. And it's like, all I heard was like, you're a horrible writer. And he's like, no, do you want to get better? Or do you want me to tell you what you want to hear? Right. It's like, but the fact that he was even helping me meant that he thought I had potential, right? But you hear these things very differently. And when I think about a lot of self-help, it comes from white privileged dudes. right? Like, or even if it's coming from women, we're still in this hierarchical masculine way of being. And so, like, and I'll give you this example of, Deepak Chopra. I know everybody loves Deepak Chopra. He wrote a book on emotional eating, and it was about your story. He takes a very different approach than I do, but he was talking about, like, if you just have to stay late at work, you just have to put boundaries up. And let's take a step back. Deepak Chopra, right, is a male, right? So he's at the top of the food chain. He's a doctor, even more at the top of the food chain. If Deepak Chopra says, I'm going to leave work, no one's going to say something. But the research that we have is, like, if women say they need to leave work early, especially if it's for their children, they're thought of as high maintenance. They're thought of as unreliable. Meanwhile, if a dude says, I'm leaving for my kids, they're thought of as the greatest soccer dad ever. And so I just share that example as a lot of times we're getting self-help from people who are in privileged positions where it really just is about them getting over themselves. Do you know what I mean? But the rest of us who have bills to pay or we have things that we have to manage, it becomes a little bit more complex and nuanced. And I think that's a big piece that, Eva, as you were saying, like, you had to have a job. You were signing for a mortgage, right? With your now fiance, I'm assuming. But so it was like, okay, I can't just quit this job because it's horrible. It's like, no, I have real responsibilities here that I have to take into context.
Yeah, privilege is such a big thing. Like, that was kind of eye-opening for me as well when I think you said that on a podcast, or I don't know, remember, but you said how, like, most entrepreneurs actually have family money. And I was like, yes, oh my God. That's why, like, I can't just say, I'm going to quit my job today and start my business tomorrow, because it just doesn't work that way for a lot of people.
And there are people that do that aren't privileged, that you'll hear their stories and, I was practically homeless for 2 years building my business up and I lived on my friends' couches. And, like, that doesn't make them a hero necessarily. I mean, that's a choice that they had. But I just want to be clear for other people that, like, myself included, like, I don't want to be living on people's couches. Like, I want to be an entrepreneur, and I want to do it in a more calculated, like, not as high risk way, because I don't want the risk of not having, food on the table or a roof over my head.
Yeah, but yeah. And even, like, I forget, someone was saying, like, but I think often how entrepreneurial stories, get played out, like Jeff Bezos' story, like they make it seem like he was in a dorm room, and, like, or even Mark Zuckerberg, but yeah, he was at Harvard, right? And, like, or, like, you even read Malcolm Gladwell's book Blink, and he talks about Bill Gates. Like, he came from a really privileged family. He had all this time to study code, right? Then you go to college and it's so much about your network. And so it's okay. But I think we often leave in the self-development world, you need that dramatic arc from a narrative structure. It's like, okay, we watch movies because of the emotional tension, right? And I think sometimes we beef them up or not. And then when we look at ourselves and say, why can't I do that? Yeah, this isn't to say, like, oh, these people, like, are better. Like, I'm not trying to say they're better or worse. It's just like we all have to take to account our own history and where we are. And I think to what Eva, I would love for you to talk about this, is, like, once you learn the skill sets of how to manage your emotions and how you're seeing the world, you can then move forward in a very productive and skilled way, because living a life of meaning and purpose does not just happen. So can you talk a little bit about that nuance that you found, Eva?
Yeah, I think so. I didn't mean to say that all entrepreneurs are privileged.
Oh, I know. I think we were saying that to cover all our butts.
Yeah. It's more that, the advice you hear, it comes from this kind of privileged perspective of just do it, but there's more to it than just doing it. And that kind of kept me stuck, that advice of kind of, you need to all or nothing kind of, I felt like I needed to quit my job to go into yoga teaching full time to make this happen. Whereas now I can see that I can actually work with another piece of advice you hear all the time is do what you can with what you have. But I didn't know how I could do that. So now what I've come to since working with you, Ali, is kind of, I started to teach yoga at work, and I started to study part-time while I'm working, and I'm starting to do wellness talks at work. So I'm making it work where I am, and I'm getting so much support from people. Like, my company supports me so much on this path, and it's not seen as taking away from my work, but actually enriching the office that I work in and making an impact on the company I work in, actually. And that feels amazing.
Yeah, and that's kudos to you because, I mean, this is what I'm talking about, developing the skills. Like, you put the proposal together, you learned how to talk, you learned how to find, in Truce with Food, we're like the collaboration. Where's the win-win? And so when we're, especially in that avoider pattern, we tend to think in all or nothing and build things up, and we think there's a conflict. But you took the time to like learn your own emotional response and what was important to you and match that with what the company is. And that is self-trust, right? I'm going to take these chances. I'm going to get clear on this. And I think that's important for people to learn, is that there's skills here that can be built. It doesn't just happen, right? You did the work to make that happen.
Yeah, and I feel like now I can, I never would have ever before in a job approached my boss to be like, hey, I'm studying this outside of work. Can I talk about it at work? Like, that never would have crossed my mind before. But now I'm like, okay, that's what I want to do. And I can package this in a way that works for them as well and move forward on this path that I'm on in little steps. And every little step's going to add up in the end, rather than having to, black and white, do all or nothing in an all or nothing way.
Yeah, and one thing that I think was a big revelation for you in Truce with Food was that we don't have one purpose, right? Again, all or nothing in the self-development world. I'm sure, Juliette, how people are like, you have one passion and you follow your passion, when really, when we look at the growth mindset research, you really develop a passion for what you're doing over time. And like, I don't know, Juliette, if you can speak to this, but I know for me, like, my passion for adult learning and getting people to be independent thinkers grew over time. I was like trying to figure out a food problem because I had the problem, and like, emotional health is important, but it took like years of sticking with something when the passion wore off, right? Which passion is often like, could be our wounds or whatnot, but it takes a while to like really develop the skills. And that's where like you need persistence. And it just takes a while, I think, really to find what your purpose is. However, you can have purposes every day. Like, me being a good pet parent is my purpose, right? Like, me being like helping my sister out right now with her wedding is really meaningful to me. And so I think sometimes, again, in that all or nothing black and white way, if we tell ourselves we only have one purpose, God, that puts so much pressure on it, including to make money from it, but sometimes you're just not going to.
Yeah, totally. I feel like it just broadened my view of what my purpose is. So kind of when I came out of yoga teacher training, my purpose was this very narrow statement of, I need to help people, it's not that narrow, but help people live a healthier life. But then now I feel like it's broadened into just helping people in general. Like, if I can teach people at work about what I do at work and that helps them, that gives me purpose. Or even if I help my niece, I don't know, ride a bike, that gives me purpose because I'm helping someone. So you can find purpose in so many different ways. And like, I looked at the Japanese that ikigai diagram the other day, and saw like how it should be this overlap of what you love, what you're good at, what you can get paid for, and what the world needs. And I feel like you can do all these things separately. It doesn't have to be this one thing in the middle that does all of these things. Like, what the world needs might be that you need to raise a child, and what you love might be teaching yoga, and what you get paid for might be something else that you're good at work, and it can all come together as separate parts, right?
Yeah.
Well, you have to be okay with things transforming and not being so fixated on, what the original plan was and your original dream and purpose, and not feeling guilty or down on yourself if you realize that isn't going to work for you,
And I think too, when you start to develop self-trust, and like I can hear it in Eva, is like you start to have patience, right? You're like, okay, when I trust myself, there isn't and part of transforming the all or nothing mindset is also a scarcity mindset of transforming, like, well, there's only so many people who can do this or that, or, or am I behind because there's, when we're competing, especially, we have that scarcity mindset, but there's the patience to actually pay attention to what's in front of you and learn so that you can get to the next step versus just kind of thinking you're going to skyrocket in some way that, hey, we would all love to do, right? But then you don't have the skills that you needed to learn.
Yeah, like it's, little steps every single day.
And Eva, one of the things that I love, because in Truce with Food, we had kind of like a thread where people just like post articles and everything. And I loved how you were starting to be able to see like the black and white mindset everywhere in Selfhelp. It's like once you see it, you can't unsee it, which is kind of like, oh my God, your information sources change it, like everything changes. Can you think off the top of your head any other examples of how you were like, oh my God, this is such black and white thinking and like we need more nuance and context?
Personality tests are such a big one. It's like, oh my God, I used to do them all, like Myers-Briggs and the Enneagram and all of them. Like, there's so many, but now I can see how they actually, you are not the ITFN type. You are a changing and evolving person. Like that doesn't define who you are as a person. If you take a test and it tells you that you are the questioner or the, I don't know, whatever you are. I actually I used to take them all, and after Truce with Food, I took some of them again and I had a completely different result, and it kind of proved to me that I'm not one fixed person like a personality test tells me.
Well, and I think that's a great example of, we always say like, if you think of yourself as a plant, right? And it's like, what environment are you in? And especially, I think in personal development, no one looks at what they would call in depth psychology the shadow or our uncomfortable feelings, right? So we're only looking at our strengths or like the parts of ourselves that we love to affirm versus saying like, what about the area I'm not so strong in, which is dealing with discomfort because I'm not taught this, right? And so then I don't learn to deal with it. And then it can get worse over time if I don't nip it in the bud. But really understanding ourselves from that contextual place is like so liberating. Don't you think? Like it's great that we evolve over time versus.
Yeah. It's helpful to get to know yourself when you are getting started in that. But I had spent so many years doing all the personality tests that I didn't even know what to believe anymore who I am. And now I'm kind of at a point where I can see where
you're multidimensional.
To know who I am or what's the truth rather than trying to listen to someone else telling me what the truth is.
Yeah, I think when you put such a hard label on yourself, like, I'm, introverted in this way, but I'm extroverted in that way. And then it can kind of guide you to making decisions just based off of that, not really based on your intuitive knowing of who you are. It's all external knowing of who you are. Like, this is what this thing told me I am, so I need to go with that.
Yeah. I was doing another podcast actually last night. They were interviewing me and I was talking about the difference between safety and freedom. And I think we all really crave freedom. And I loved how Eva said, like, well, I have to figure out what's true because, right, true is freedom. And I described the difference of like perceived safety really is, okay, I'm extroverted here, introverted here. I'm an upholder, I'm an abstainer, I'm a this or that. It makes us feel safe in a way because like, oh, this is the template for how to act. But freedom is really choice, right? It's like, and freedom is different in each moment, right? So like if you didn't get any sleep the night before, you may not want to go to a party versus being like, but I'm an extrovert and it's going to make me so happy to go. Like maybe not. And true freedom is knowing yourself and your patterns and your triggers and then being able to choose and have the flexibility to choose, right? Rather than being so rigid of, well, this is my destiny.
Yeah, I think the other one, I have another example there. Like while I was doing Truce with Food, Ali, remember how I applied for another job and I was so like, looking back now, I was so needy wanting them to hire me And now I can flip perspective and be like, would this actually have been the right choice for me? Would this have worked for me? And then there were so many things that didn't work in that particular case. And then, I like kind of flipping perspective from, I want them to hire me, to, do I actually really want to work there? Like,
was that for your esteem, to make yourself feel like good about yourself if they hire you? It's not necessarily if this is even the right thing for me, but it's just the feeling like, okay, I'm good enough. They want me.
Yeah. Just being like, well, this is who I am. And if you want me, I'm happy to work for you. But if we're not a fit for each other, then there isn't really a point of doing this, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up, Eva, because, I replayed a podcast episode I did before about the adult development continuum that we go through in Truce with Food, and how we're becoming, we call it the boss mindset or self-authoring. But often why we are in these black and white, like, please like me, hire me, is because we're in this socialized mindset, and we're only evaluating if we've been chosen, or if we haven't been rejected, or if someone likes us, rather than doing the work to figure out, what do I value? What do I want? What do I need? And for you to say right fit, I love that word, because it's not implying that anything is right or wrong, right? We don't want to get back into the black and white mindset, but is this the right fit? I mean, that is such a different question than, did they like me? Was I good enough? It's more about the right fit. And then that develops self-trust, because you don't take everything so personally. And it doesn't mean that they missed off on a great opportunity. It just might have meant that you had different skills, right? And so we're not because if we make the other people bad or the situation bad, then we're still setting up the binary that we all need to get out of. Is that clear, or did I just kind of make it more complicated?
No. That's 100% clear. I've been thinking about that a lot lately in opportunities in my life, or not even opportunities, but people and friendships and relationships. And, people come and go, and maybe it's just not the right fit at different times. And it doesn't mean you don't have to fight that.
Yeah. Well, and as both of you are talking, I'm thinking about, we try to put such a fixed mindset on the body and who we are. And as Eva was saying, you're ever evolving and growing. Like, the body's dynamic, nature's dynamic. It's always evolving and changing. And we can either get on the program of what's true, or we can spend our whole lives fighting it, right?
Yeah, I think about that with my fitness regimen. Lately I haven't been feeling like I want to lift weights. And for so long, I just, lifting weights is something that has always just fulfilled me and has been like part of my identity and what people know me as, someone who is really big into strength training. But my body lately has just been talking to me and telling me that I just want Pilates and I just want to go running, and that's it, And there's nothing wrong with that. That's, if I look at it like an observer, it's just, okay, well, I'm still being healthy and active and, moving my body. It just doesn't necessarily need to be in this one way that I had defined myself as.
Well, yeah, and because we're also hitting fall. Eva is coming into spring in Australia, but in the fall, I want to start doing more cardio and everything, because I'm not as overheated from the heat in the summer. So I bet you're getting more in sync with the seasons, it sounds like.
Yeah, I have the same thing. Like, I used to, when I worked out, I used to need this routine of doing the same thing every day to be able to make it a habit and keep doing it. And these days it's more intuitively listening to what I actually feel like moving every day. And then that turns the whole regime around with what actually feels right for me today. It might be running today and it might be stretching tomorrow, but it's going to be different every day, what your body tells you, rather than having to do something. Like, I make plans of what I want to do and then I change them last minute because of how I'm feeling in that moment.
I love that. I have so many clients who are like, I used to be the biggest planner. And it's not that they're like completely disorganized anymore, but they trust that intuition, and they trust themselves to still prioritize what they want to get done. But it just doesn't have to be so rigid, because they trust themselves to do things naturally rather than having to have a plan. This Insatiable episode is sponsored by my client-described life-changing program, Why Am I Eating This Now? If you are tired of the on-off cycle, want food to stop being worth it in the moment, but not afterwards, and you want to stop self-sabotaging with food, this live program is for you. Early bird registration begins on September 10th. So visit alishapiro.com/food freedom 2018 to sign up to be notified when registration opens for this year's live session. Want to know a little bit more? Stay tuned to the end of this episode. So, Eva, what are some of the questions that help you tap into that self-trust? I loved how, you said, like, I've stopped being so needy and chasing people and jobs, and you have a choice now. And what kind of questions help you step into that boss mindset or that more aligned, right fit mindset?
Well, I guess I ask myself, what do I want out of this situation? So if I'm going to catch up with someone, I'm starting to think about how I want to frame the situation. So which place do I want to go to? Which time works for me? How much time do I actually want to spend with this person? So I kind of set the framework that I want things to happen in, rather than being like, oh, we're going to meet, what time works, and trying to make it work for them. Whereas now I'm more like, okay, what works for, like, I'm getting really clear on what I want to do before I make a suggestion of what we should do, rather than trying to think, oh, this person likes that place and we should go there. I'm putting myself first, if that makes sense. And that actually makes it a lot easier, because a lot of other people are often not that clear on what they want to do.
Well, yeah. And I think on that, even you're prioritizing kind of the win-win. And I find people love when you take leadership like that, right? It's like, oh, I wanted to get together, but now that you've set it up like, oh, let's meet here at this time. It's like, sure, I can do it.
Yeah. It makes it easy. Yeah. It makes it so much easier if I can say, I want to meet at this time, at this place, and they just have to say yes, then that works great. And I get exactly what I want to do. And like, for example, if I go to a family gathering and I find it to be such a drag and I don't want to go, then I can ask myself, what can I do to make it more fun for everyone? And bring along a game I want to play with the kids that are there, or a movie I want to suggest watching, or, just taking things into your own hands rather than letting life happen to you, if that makes sense.
No, it totally does. And I think self-help, often that's the goal, but there's no how, right? Because the irony is, this is where you have to look at the design of things. Like, if you learn something by learning versus, or like reading versus experimenting, especially as adults, it sits in differently. And like self-help is oddly prescriptive, even though it's trying to generate self-trust. And it's like, do you get, like, am I being clear? Like, how can you learn to trust yourself when you're still getting formulas from someone else, I guess?
Yeah, you're kind of applying what worked for someone else, you're applying that to yourself, expecting that it's going to work the same way for you. And it just doesn't always work that way, I guess.
Yeah, and there's a lot of patience when it comes to this stuff and experimentation. We talk about that a lot. And, we live in such an instant gratification world that it's hard to say, okay, I have to just let this unfold over time and not want it to happen tomorrow, have all the answers to my life. You're never going to have all the answers to your life, but you just have to put things into practice. Like you said, going to a family gathering and, all right, well, I'll bring a game. And it's like, well, did that work? Did you have more fun? No? Okay, we'll try something else the next time. It's really, life is just all about just trial and error.
Yeah.
That's the fun of it, really. I think that part, if you can embrace that and, have fun with it. Like, I liked this, I didn't like this. It's like getting to know yourself over the years, over time.
Yeah, I think though that takes a foundation of self-trust, because if not, the things that don't go so well, you start making it about you. Like, how do I not even know what I want? And like, what we talk about in Truce with Food, like say Eva had done that and didn't quite know how to filter someone was like, who brings games to a family function, right? Like people start to, the odd thing about this protector is that it makes things into about us that aren't about us. And so you kind of have to I don't know, manage that. However, I agree with you. Once you get enough self-trust, it's super fun to experiment because you're not taking things so personally, and you're not in overwhelm all the time and you even think to ask these questions. That's, I think, the biggest challenge is we don't know what we don't know. And that's only can come from self-trust, because then we start to know what questions work for us or what body cues work for us, right? That's a lot of what mindset isn't just your thoughts. It's what am I sensing? What am I feeling? What's my intuition? But we're often blocked from that because a lot of self-help and self-development only focuses on mindset from a thought perspective.
Yeah. Not even prescriptive as I have this list of questions I ask myself, but it kind of comes up naturally now as well. And it's different questions depending on the situation. Like it could also be, is this mine or is this theirs? So is this actually about me or is this about the other person that's saying something?
Do you find that works, and how do you figure that out?
That's a good question.
Like, do you ask the person? Because I think that same thing, is this me? Is this them? And, ultimately, unless you talk to the person and find out, then you can only assume that it's your story that you're creating.
Yeah. So, the other thing is that, we create a lot of stories around what's happening when it's not actually true. So if someone, I don't know, you just get an off feeling from another person, you're like, oh, she's upset with me for some reason. And you make up this whole story in your mind, whereas instead, next time you see her, you're like, oh, I had this feeling, is like that you're upset about me. Is that true? And then that person might say, oh no, I just had a bad day at work. And then it kind of becomes clear that, oh my God, I made up this whole story about her being upset with me when that's actually not the case at all.
I find that challenging at times because people don't own up to how they're really feeling if they haven't done work on themselves,
Yeah.
So it's not so I did a lot of Landmark. I don't know if you're familiar with it. It's like it's a self-help transformative kind of program that a lot of people will call a cult or a brainwashing. I mean, I found
I've heard of it, but I've never done it.
Yeah, I mean, it's like these long weekend courses, and they they break you down, but like some of them are like 12 plus hour days, and they want, they get to the root of your story and how your story is driving all your decisions and all your thoughts and feelings and all that stuff about like, what's the story and what's the actual reality. But, sometimes you'll never know with people. Like if you say, oh, were you upset with me? And that person's like, no, I wasn't. But then maybe they were. But I just think that it's about, at the end of the day, what we're talking about is how do you build enough trust in yourself too, that regardless, you feel worthy, you feel strong, you feel okay, that you wouldn't even maybe necessarily have to ask somebody, right? You can just...
If it was about something like I didn't eat the food that she gave me, for example, then okay with her being upset about that, but it was my choice that
exactly
that they gave me. Yeah.
And it's also when we're getting into self-authoring, it's getting really clear on what you value and saying and looking at like each interaction is like we say is a data point, not an endpoint. And so it's like, if I care about this friendship, is it important to me to have that level of intimacy? Or if it's just a work relationship, like what do I need to get from this relationship so that I'm effective here? And then it kind of puts those transient emotions also in perspective, right? Because it's like maybe that person is upset with me or whatever, but is that going to affect our relationship? Some people would have to talk about it. Some people are like, nope, as long as I'm clear that I'm meeting my objectives and she sees that, right? It's like, it gets a little bit more like when we think about how do we want this to end, it also means like over time, not just in the moment. So I'll just kind of put that plug in there.
Yeah, totally. Like the one instance of me not liking what she offered me or something doesn't mean that we can't be friends anymore.
Yeah. Or, as someone who's like still has accommodating tendencies, I'll be like, I hope you don't like, I'm so like thankful that you offered me this. And I'm, it's so important. Like I've had such a great time to just make sure people know that like, okay, just because I didn't have the food doesn't mean I didn't have a good time. Because for the hostess, they probably want to make sure people had a good time, right? But we talk a lot about in Truce with Food of like asking the people ahead of time, like, what's important to you about this? And people will open up because no one asks anyone. Like, we kind of laugh when you say, Eva, in Truce with Food, like, how does anybody communicate effectively? Because everyone's like protective parts are talking to each other.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, navigating people is so tricky. It's kind of the most unreliable thing.
That's actually funny that you bring that up because, some friends of mine are putting together like a birthday celebration for me. And one of the things that they asked me was, what matters to you in this? Like, what will make this feel like a successful birthday celebration for you? And I just thought that was like so insightful and like not something that people ever ask each other. It's more or less like, I did this for you. Hope I want you to enjoy it. And they put all the onus on them. Like if you create a party for someone or, it becomes all about the person who created it and, whether or not everyone had a good time versus like asking like, well, what's meaningful to you? How can I make this so that you will enjoy yourself to the max? So I thought that was like, I couldn't believe that those questions I were asked. I was like, this is amazing.
And didn't you soften just being asked that?
I felt so felt so comforted, that people actually cared enough to find out, well, what is meaningful to me, because I might not like what each person who's going to be there likes, but they want to make this celebration about me. So it's like, what do I like?
Yeah, I swear I could like rename Truce with Food like Leadership 101 because all leadership is self-leadership, but clients are amazed at how when they start opening up these communication channels, like then the story really crumbles because you're getting the real data and you're like, oh my God, like, and you also start to find out who your real friends are and or the type of friendships that are available, right? Because not everything can be super intimate and super close and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, people often give things that are more a reflection of them. I remember when I graduated from graduate school, my dad noticed that we didn't have a TV and he was like, he got me a TV for graduate school. And I was like, Dad, I'd actually like the money because I have so many student loans. He was like, no, you need a TV. And I was like, okay, this gift was totally what my dad would have wanted, right?
Yeah, it made him feel good that you had that. Yeah, and then that's another thing. It's like, okay, my dad is happy.
Right. Well, right. And it's like, okay, my dad has given me plenty in life. Like I will just take the TV. Right. And we still have it. I mean, like 5 years later, but that's just an example of like, but people get really touched and it just opens up this level of relationship that I don't think we're used to having in our life. And then it encourages you to do more and more and you get more and more clear on what you want. Because what we often find, like your example, Juliette, is like, oh my God, someone asked me what I want. Now I have to think about it. Like, what do I want for this, right? We often not starting with the end in mind. We're often starting with that socialized, like, I just want people to be happy.
Exactly. I want them to have a good time. I want everybody else to feel like they're enjoying themselves.
Yeah. So Eva, thank you. This has been an amazingly thought-provoking conversation and such concrete examples. One thing I'm curious is like, how is the food going now? What do you see the big kind of freedom? Because I knew liberation was really important to you in terms of food. And can you share? Because even like sometimes you are still stuck in stories. We all are. But like, how have you learned to have choice there and trust? And how's the eating and how's life looking now?
Well, I guess I have just other coping mechanisms now. So instead of, going to the kitchen, getting a Tim Tam, I turn around and talk to my colleague. That's a very different thing. And I didn't know before that would help me get over whatever it was, for example. So yeah, I just developed other coping mechanisms than necessarily it being the food. And just, I developed this ability to listen to myself and knowing what I need a lot more. And the whole thing about eating is now more individual. Like it needs to work for every single person. And I'm still experimenting and working out what works for me. So I would, bake a healthy dessert and see if it tastes good and if I can see myself eating it or if not. So it's a lot of experimenting and testing what works or what doesn't work and opening up more to other people. Yeah, and we got a lot of tools that work better than eating. Like, yeah, just listen to music, talking to other people. Can't think of more examples right now. Or just asking myself those questions of, oh no, this meeting's coming up, and then turning up to the meeting with, okay, what can I contribute to this meeting, rather than going in without a plan and kind of getting overwhelmed with what's happening.
I love it. I would love to end this episode with each of us saying our least favorite self-help mantra.
Oh my gosh.
Does anybody want to start?
I don't know. There's so many. I haven't thought of one specific one.
Love and light.
What is it? Love and light.
Love and light. Only love and light.
Well, you know what? It's not I guess it's the ones where it's like, I am beautiful. I am confident. I am, just making these blanket bold statements about yourself that it's supposed to seep in. I have an amazing body, all that stuff. There's that video of that little girl on YouTube that went viral and she's doing that in the mirror. If you haven't seen it, I mean, with her, it's genuine.
Yeah. Was this a couple years ago?
Yeah, she's 3 or 4 years old. She's I am amazing. I am this. And I believe her when she says it. But, for the rest of us, I don't think that I just find that to be just such bullshit.
Or maybe it's I'm amazing, but not 24/7, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's nice to think positive thoughts about yourself and to not and again, that negative reel that is always going on, that's not true either. But it's the idea to me that you can look at yourself in the mirror and say out loud, I'm beautiful, I'm beautiful, I'm beautiful. That's not going to all of a sudden transform you into, walking out the door and being I am I'm beautiful today. I feel so much better.
Yeah. And actually, what's interesting, this study came out during a different round of Truce with Food, and the results were mixed, but in my group, but they have done research and they found that those I am beautiful statements actually make most people feel worse because they feel like they're faking it.
Yeah, exactly. You're this is so disingenuous.
Yeah. A couple people felt like it really helped them, just as kind of a reminder. So it's, again, context, I guess, is everything. So, Eva, do you have one? I don't want to put you on the spot. I know that I didn't ask you guys.
Well, I think the biggest one for me was just the whole labeling of the inner critic. It's a negative label on the inner critic. And then I like how you call it the inner protector, because, there's a reason for it to be there. And it's not, just giving it a negative label makes you fight it. And then that doesn't help. It's not helpful to having to master your inner critic or gaining control over your inner critic. It's not how it works. So I think that's my biggest pet peeve, so to speak, whenever someone puts this negative label on it.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, especially because what we resist persists. So
yes, exactly.
So maybe
I don't like that one. That's my least favorite. I'm just kidding.
You want to argue with the Tao Te Ching of 10, 20,000 years?
No, that one is definitely true.
Hey, maybe it's not true. I don't know. We're in the upside down.
It's
right?
for me. That one has always resonated with me specifically.
Yeah. Yeah. Let us know maybe tag all of us in your least favorite personal development meme that hasn't worked for you. And we can all comment. Thank you so much for taking the time to share your journey with us, Eva. And I'm just so excited for you as a wellness practitioner going in with this nuanced, contextual mindset. You're just going to help, you're already helping people, and you're just going to continue to as you develop your own trust so that you can go deeper with people as well. So thank you so much for being here.
Oh, I'm so excited. Thank you.
Yeah. This Insatiable episode is sponsored by my life-changing program, Why Am I Eating This Now? And that's not an exaggeration. Session after session, clients tell me this program changed their life. Or in the case of Shelley, who said, I wish I could bottle this feeling up and give it to everyone. If you're tired of the on-off cycle, want food to stop being worth it in the moment, but not afterwards, and you want to stop self-sabotaging with food and cultivate self-trust, like we've talked about in this episode, this program is for you. You can learn a clear and exact process with tools for getting to the root cause of why your emotions overpower you and you eat. You'll also learn with and from a dynamic community that likes to connect over the type of conversations we have on Insatiable. We simplify food, not give you more rules to rebel against. As one Why Am I Eating This Now client says, there is no white knuckling with this process. Early bird registration begins on September 10th. Early birds will receive a discount, early access to the classroom, and a freebie you won't want to miss. So be sure to visit alishapiro.com/Food Freedom 2018 to be notified when registration opens for this year's live session. Thank you, Health Rebels, for tuning in today. Have a reaction, question, or want the transcript from today's episode? Find me at alishapiro.com. I'd love if you leave a review on Apple Podcast and tell your friends and family about Insatiable. It helps us grow our community and share a new way of approaching health in our bodies. Thanks for engaging in a different kind of conversation. And remember, always, your body truths are unique, profound, real, and liberating.